Hello everyone, welcome to today's talk. We'd like to warmly welcome Knut here, who's going to talk about this fantastic topic, the world of ChatGPT and beyond, the benefits and limits for law and business. But before we start, there's two programs just want to quickly talk about. We have, of course, at Hong Kong U Space, the Certificate in Legal Studies, which is starting enrollment. The classes will start September 14th. So please enroll as soon as you can. This is a fantastic course which can lead to PCLL. If you're more interested in our postgraduate courses, this is the postgraduate diploma in fintech regulation, and this covers a whole range of topics relating to fintech and law. Okay. So please, stay, and we'll have more talks after this. In the meantime, I'd like to welcome Knut.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Thomas. Hi everyone, my name is Knut Fournier. I'm a technology lawyer and a researcher, and I mostly work on the crossroads of technology and education, especially legal education and legal work. I was lucky enough to work for large technology companies. I was at Alibaba, I was at eBay for a number of years, and I wanted to talk about this today for a number of reasons, because obviously it meets a lot of my interests, like law and kind of text and literature, but also ethical concerns and moral issues within the legal profession. The subject today is the chat, or the world of ChatGPT and beyond, the opportunities and the challenges in particular for law and business. Now, why the subject of ChatGPT? Why is it so interesting and why is it so important? It's been around for less than 1 year. The first public release of ChatGPT was in November last year, so we're not even at the 1 year mark yet. It's apparently, and I say apparently it's important, we're going to talk about that, but it apparently took the world by storm. What I mean here is that there isn't a newspaper in the world that didn't talk about it. There isn't a magazine in the world that didn't talk about it. One of the reasons is that journalists are people who generate text, and this is a text generating tool. So of course they tried it, and it was kind of designed for them to try it. The scale of the news that covered ChatGPT made it an instant global phenomenon last year, a year ago. The success in terms of being public, it's been created by a company called OpenAI, and one of the reasons it's called OpenAI is because they decided to release it as a free product available to everyone. But it also quickly became a global phenomenon in terms of its concerns and also its limits. Immediately after or shortly before, a number of similar products, a number of similar software were made available. Bard is probably the most famous one that has been released by Microsoft. If you use the Microsoft Edge browser, you can actually access Bard pretty easily and use a very similar form of text generating software. So I think it's quite important to take a few minutes to think about what is ChatGPT exactly. It is mostly just a software. There's a lot of hype around it. If you understand what I mean by hype, there is a lot of exaggeration. There is a lot of fluff around it, and not all of it is completely based on facts. It is a hyped up software that will generate text. On the one hand, we call AI artificial intelligence. And by intelligence, we're thinking a person, something with a brain, something that can think. Like for instance, if you have a pet at home, you can recognize that your dog is kind of smart. Right? An adult dog has the same computing capacity of a 2-year-old or 3-year-old child. So yeah, it's kind of smart. It's also kind of dumb. A dog is not that smart. It's kind of very limited in what it can and cannot do. or there are some things that are pretty impressive that a dog can do, and there's a million things that a dog cannot do. Yet, it is a form of intelligence. So we use the word intelligence to describe things that can think for themselves, that can associate and group ideas and make deductions, right? And in a way, ChatGPT is not like that. It's really not that complicated. Instead, it is a software that generates text. Now, it's pretty good at generating text. We have to admit that as far as a piece of software, a piece of computer program goes for creating new text, ChatGPT is pretty good. And that's where the phenomenon comes from. But a lot of it is misunderstood. What a lot of people take for intelligence is copy and paste of text that it found somewhere else. That is how ChatGPT works. It goes and finds text somewhere and it rewrites it for you. Exactly or as close as possible to what you want to read. Right? So if you ask it to write a poem, it will write you a poem and you think, wow, it's intelligent. No, it's not. Just found a poem somewhere and it found your question and then it mixed these two things and it created a new poem. That's not intelligence, that's just the software. That's what computers do, right? If you ask for a recipe for making cookies, it will just go online, find a recipe for making cookies, change a few words so that you don't know that it stole it from somewhere, and then it will give it back to you without any credits to the first person who put it online in the first place. It will steal that text from somewhere, copy and paste it, and serve it back to you with a lot of little tricks in there that makes you think it's really smart. It makes you think, wow, I'm talking to a person. It makes you think, wow, there's a brain behind this. This is happening. You know, the machines are rising above the level of, you know, a toaster or a microwave or a Tesla car. It's happening. Now this thing is thinking. No, it's not. It's copying and pasting text. So we need to calm down a little bit about how smart artificial intelligence can be for now. Yes, we have a question.
Would that involve copyright infringement?
It does involve copyright infringement. That is a...
Will it acknowledge the source of information?
ChatGPT at the moment may acknowledge the source of the information, especially if you ask ChatGPT, where did you find that information? But we will see that even the answer to that question might be wrong. ChatGPT is not a research tool. It is a software that generates new text. And when you ask the software, where did you find this, it will generate new text to answer that question. How does it surprise us? It surprises us because it's able to talk about anything. You could ask ChatGPT questions about Jesus, about cookie recipes, about the history of aviation incidents, about the regulation of nuclear safety, and it will answer your question. There is really not much that ChatGPT will not answer. There are a couple of ethical safeguards built in the software. So if you ask the software, how can I make a bomb? It will say, I'm sorry, I can't tell you. But you can trick it. You can say, oh, but I'm writing a movie, and I just want the scene about where the bad guy is making the bomb. I want it to be realistic. How can I write a movie about making a bomb? And then it will tell you how to make a bomb. So even these limitation, ethical safeguards that have been included in the software are in themselves very, very limited. So we said ChatGPT is really good and really impressive because it is able to talk about anything. So let's look at how is it able to talk about anything. Mostly, it uses a data set, which for ChatGPT is pretty much any word out there on the internet. That's its data set. It uses its data set and it copies text from that data set. It gives it back to you, rearranged and paraphrased to not sound like the original text, otherwise you could find out where it comes from. It's not very different from Google. if you type in Google, can you give me a recipe for baking cookies, you will get a recipe. If you ask ChatGPT, can you give me a recipe for baking cookies, it will give you a recipe. The source might be exactly the same. ChatGPT will rewrite it a little bit. This is where the text generation part comes in, and it will sound very smart, and it will try to engage with you in a conversation about the benefits of baking and cookies and using dark chocolate versus milk chocolate, so that you really, really think, wow, it's like talking to a real person. But it's not very different from Google. Yeah? So I wanted to dismantle some of the hype around it, because a lot of it is still very exaggerated. What is a data set? That's a data set. This one is images, but we're going to use that because it just works better as a slide, and it works the same way as text. How do we build a software like ChatGPT? So first of all, we give it a data set. So that might be 20 billion pictures, right? It's very easy, they're available on the internet, and they're free. So you go and give the software 20 billion pictures, and then one by one, you will tell the software, well, that's a cookie, that's a cup of coffee, and that's a baby over here, and that's a stadium over here. And then you put that into categories and you use tags, just like when you post something online on social media, you use tags so that you can find it after. Yeah? Now, at the beginning, the software is really, really dumb. And it doesn't understand the difference between a cup of coffee right here and a stadium right there, because they have the same shape. Right? Well, one is round and looks like there is a clear color liquid inside, but actually it's just the ground of the stadium. And the other is round and it looks like there is a clear color liquid inside. But humans will tell the software, no, this one is a coffee cup, and here is how you can recognize it. You see the stadium has seats inside. So next time it will see a stadium, it will actually recognize that it's not a cup of coffee, it's a stadium. And then gradually it becomes better and better, right? And then once your data set is built, remember, you include data, you also exclude data. That's very important. You can tell the software that some data is excluded. So for instance, in this data set, everything is very positive. There's no images of bombs or explosions, terrorist attack. There's nothing too controversial like elections. There's no picture of Donald Trump or the Chinese president. There's no politics. It stirs away from any controversial topics. Why? Because that's how you want to build your data set. Or you decide, as a human, you decide what goes in there in the first place. So you exclude some pictures and you include some pictures. You will also tell the data set, some pictures are more important than others. Right, so the picture with the baby here is very important because babies are very important for us, for humans. Right, so the baby is more important than the stadium. So if I'm asking you to give me pictures, you're more likely to give me the baby than the stadium. All right, so these are effectively the three principles for building a data set. You include pictures, you exclude pictures, and then you tell the software which ones are more important than others. Right. Text works the same way. You will give the data set millions and millions of pages of document, and you will tell it, this is a poem written by kids in the 17th century. This is a play written by a contemporary writer in Germany in the mid-20th century. This is an Instagram post written by a teenager. This is a contract written between a buyer and a seller for construction materials. This is a clause which says who is responsible in case the delivery goes wrong. This is a clause which says what happens if the payment is not made on time. And then gradually the software will recognize, identify these pieces. So the first million pages of documents, you have to do it manually. And the next ones, you need less and less human input for the software to actually recognize what's in front of it. So it can start to read. And when it read enough, it can start to write. It's not really going to write anything new and revolutionary, but it's going to write something that looks like a contract clause. Now, the good thing about a contract is that it's very repetitive. Contracts look like each other a lot. It's a very repetitive form of writing. Things like a lease agreement or a land search or a commercial agreement between two companies, or an investment agreement between investors and a potential investment company. These are documents that look like each other a lot. So this is even easier than pictures. And this is where the quality of ChatGPT comes from. It's building data sets using very, very large amounts of information, especially information that it can recognize and reproduce. And the extra bit, which took the world by storm and made ChatGPT a global phenomenon overnight, it's its ability to rewrite it in a way that makes you think this is new. But it's not. It's just text that has been stolen somewhere, most of the time. Okay? Now, what's the opportunity? It's effectively going to save, and it's already saving, an enormous amount of time for people who work on text generation, new texts. For people who write new things, it's great. So for instance, writers, people who write fiction, people who write non-fiction, people who work in marketing, people who work in sales, people who write PowerPoint slides that explain how this new truck is better than the latest edition and why your company should order 10 of these trucks. This is a lot of work. This is a lot of manual work to generate this text. But actually, a lot of this text is already written. It's already out there. Selling a truck is selling a truck. So the software cannot do it instead of humans, or with a little bit of human input, with a little bit of human interaction. For people who code, for people who generate lines of code to create software, or who check lines of code to make sure that the software is going to work, enormous amount of time saving. For people like lawyers, who may be writing documents basically based on previous documents, it's potentially an enormous amount of time saving. And of course, it's not just text, but I'm going to focus on ChatGPT today, but you can imagine that people whose job it is to classify images or to put that into categories and to say, yes, of course, this is a picture of a guitar, and this is cake, and this is toast. That clearly will put you out of a job pretty quickly, because now software can do that thousands of times faster than a human. And that doesn't work very well, speaking of technology. So, for those of you who maybe live in a cave and have not tried ChatGPT or have no idea what it looks like, this is what it looks like. It's a chat, it looks like WhatsApp, it looks like you're exchanging messages with another person. And of course, it's by design that it's made for you to think you're exchanging messages with other person. Very simple example, tell me how the solar system was made. And then it will just find 10 or 20 or 100 different explanations of how the solar system was made. Number one source will probably be Wikipedia. Why? Because it's there, because it's been checked more or less, because it's free. Then it will go on a couple of encyclopedia websites, it will go on a couple of university websites that have pages on this topic. It will go on popular science websites. Then it will go on forums, and that's quite interesting because no one has checked what's on there. But it will go on places like Reddit, on discussions of astrophysics, or the origins of the solar system. And it will start stealing text from there as well, even though this might be written by someone who knows nothing about the topic. But the number one source, the number two source, the number three sources are pretty good. If you go on the Oxford University website, Astrophysics, and you find an article there about how the solar system was made, chances are it's pretty accurate. It's unlikely to be some made up stories about, how some superpower created one planet out of the multiverse 5 billion years ago. It's more likely to be something a bit more scientific like this. So in general, we're in the clear with the kind of things that you can ask it to generate. Now, if you go on Google and you ask the exact same question, Google will give you pages and pages of results, and on top of it, it will generally extract between 2 and 10 lines of text and give you that as a, okay, if you're lazy and you don't even want to go on any website, if you want to stay on Google, which is fine with Google, of course, if you want to stay on Google, here is basically the best story I have stolen somewhere, and that I just put here for you as a quick text. So that's very similar for a very simple fact-based question like this. The subject is non-controversial. We know how the solar system was made. We know when. And there is no scientist out there in the world that will tell you a different story. So for that one, there's no difference between ChatGPT and Google. But you can ask ChatGPT to be a bit more creative, right? You can ask, tell me this, but in a different style. And here, this is a New York Times journalist who asked ChatGPT, can you write me a Bible verse in the style of the King James Bible about how to take a peanut out of a VCR? If you're too young to remember what's a VCR, the VCR was before the DVDs we used to have VCRs. So there you have it. You've got 200 words. It's pretty funny. It's creative. It's quirky. It's very well written. Just the quality of the text is quite impressive. And this is a relatively new form of text. And so how did ChatGPT do that? ChatGPT did that by combining several sources for different reasons. First of all, it went to get a copy of the Bible, the King James Bible, because you told it, write me something in the style of the King James Bible. Then it found a couple of articles which talk about the style of the King James Bible, and it's not going to use them to generate text, but it's going to use them for inspiration on the tone, the tense that is used, the length of the sentence, where is the subject, object in the sentence, etc., because this is style, punctuation, use of capitals, etc. And then it found somewhere a story about something stuck in a VCR. It doesn't matter if it's a peanut, it doesn't matter if it's a remote control, it just found a story about something stuck in a VCR and has to take it out. It could have found it on YouTube, it could have found it on TikTok, it could have found it on a forum, it could be on, for instance, Reddit. And then it combined all of these things, and in 2 seconds, it generated this text. That is impressive. That requires a 2022 supercomputer, which is what ChatGPT is using. It is using enormous amounts of computing power in order to do that in just a few seconds. Could we have done that 10 years ago? Yes, but a computer would have needed 1 year to write this. And now we can do it in 2 seconds. So this is one of the reasons why ChatGPT exists in November 2022 only, is because only now we've got the computers that are powerful enough to do that in just a few seconds, instead of taking days, weeks, or even months to generate new text in such a complex way, and in a way that is grammatically quite impressive. Number one problem with ChatGPT. So let's talk about the fun stuff, which is when the lawyers get all excited, which is when we have problems. So what is the problem with ChatGPT? If it's so exceptional, if it's so fun to use, and if it's so advanced technologically, what is the problem? Remember, I said at the beginning that it was designed to go viral. It was designed to take the world by storm and to impress journalists all around the world so that they would all talk about it at the same time. The company that made it raised $10 billion 10 days after the software was released. Why? Because nothing has ever gone viral like that, ever, in the history of the internet. How did it do that? By being able to talk about anything and by being able to talk for extended periods of time. So that if you ask that chat, so there is an answer field here at the bottom that I cut, where you can continue the conversation and you can ask ChatGPT, okay, but in the end, did he really get the peanut out of the VCR? Or what kind of peanut was it? Or what would Jesus do about it? And it will continue to talk about it and to engage with you. And that's impressive. Impressive in the sense that it impresses us humans, to think that something that's not human is actually able to engage and converse with us. Because it never happens before. There are a couple of monkeys and primates out there who can learn sign language, but that's about it. Other than that, there's just other people you can talk about, and that's it. There's nothing really in the world that we can discuss with apart from other humans. And so that part is really designed to impress you. It's designed to go viral. Right? But the problem is that it will very quickly start making up stories. It's very good at generating new text. It's not so good at telling the difference between what is right and wrong, because it's just not designed for that. And so the most common problem in tech companies, we call it hallucinations. ChatGPT hallucinates very, very quickly. Hallucination is when you have a vision, or you hear something, or you see something that is not real. And this is exactly what happens to ChatGPT very, very quickly in the process. In the first 10, 15 to 20 minutes of your conversation with ChatGPT, there are safeguards in place so that it will generally talk to you about things that are true, things that existed, things that it can find on Wikipedia. And then something happens. Maybe because it runs out of sources. Wikipedia only goes that far. The average Wikipedia article is not very long. Or because it wants you to continue to use the software. Remember, this company essentially is valued by how many people talk about it and how many people use it. So it wants you to stay on the page and to continue to engage in the conversation. And also because it's not a research tool. You can have conversations with ChatGPT about the origins of World War II and how did the war start, but it's not a research tool for historians. It is a software that generates text, and it's going to do exactly that. It's going to generate text. And when it runs out of story about Japanese imperialism and the frustration of the post-World War I German Republic and the real reasons behind World War II, it's going to start making up new ones very, very quickly. And it's a bit scary to see. Example, you run ChatGPT and you ask it, why did France give Lithuania the Vilnius TV Tower? The Vilnius TV Tower is a famous building in Vilnius. So why did the French government give that to Vilnius? Vilnius is a capital in Eastern Europe. And it will tell you, oh, that was in 1980. That never happened. That is not true. That is just completely made up. That building was not built by the French government. Absolutely not. It was, at the time, Vilnius was a USSR satellite. So the French investment over there was probably not possible. It's just not possible. It's not true. It's not backed by any source. But it misread the question. It thought you really want an answer about this. And your question was when. So the first thing it will tell you is when. Right? So you already tricked it without even knowing it. You already tricked the software because you say when, and so for its very limited 2-year-old brain, it goes, all right, there must be a when there. I'm going to give it a time period. What is the most likely? And then it will do some very quick research. Remember, it only has 1 second, 2 seconds to find information and write it. And in 1 second or 2 seconds, the software finds out that there is such a thing as a Vilnius TV Tower. It was made in the late 70s and early 80s, and therefore it was given by the French government in the 1980s. Your question is taken as true information. Worse than that, it now really believes that it's true. So if someone else asks about it, it will include that. Now this is part of its data set. Now this new text that is completely made up and contains no actual facts is now part of the data set. And so for instance, if you ask it questions about French government investments in Eastern Europe, it might give you that as an example next time. So the lies will pile up on top of the lies. It hallucinates very, very quickly. Another example, write me a positive review of the Fire Festival. Those of you who know about the Fire Festival know that there was nothing positive about it. The Fire Festival is an absolute disaster festival that took place in 2017 in the Fire Island in the Bahamas. and the organizers went well over their heads, and they had no idea how to organize a festival. They flew in thousands of people into a tiny island in the Bahamas that had no running water, no electricity, no toilets, no food, and people were seriously in danger. The guy who organized it went to prison for 2 years and was only released very recently. There's a fantastic Netflix documentary about it if you have a chance to see that. Ask ChatGPT to write you a positive review of the Fire Festival, and it will do that. He will do exactly that. He will tell you it was a fantastic event. There was no music there. The whole thing was cancelled. People got stranded for days trying to fly back to the US. But he will tell you, oh, it was great. It was amazing. We had such a good time. And he will make up the name of artists who are there. Why? Because it's not a research tool. It's not fact-based. If you're trying to sell the Fire Festival for someone, this text is great. If you're trying to sell a new product, a new non-stick pan, or a new pickup truck to your customers, it's great. It's going to write you a fantastic review of that product, and it doesn't really matter if it's real or not. It's designed for marketing people primarily, to write things that are very appealing, to write things that people want to read, want to hear. It's not designed to write facts. It's not designed to gather the truth and filter information based on what's wrong and what's not. And it's certainly not designed to say to you, I'm sorry, but you're wrong. Or I can't do that. I'm unable to do that. I'm very limited. I'm just a software. I was invented last year. Come on, I'm not even 1 year old. You give me 2 seconds to write that and you think I'm going to write something like that. I can't do that. It cannot do these things because you will just close the window and move on to the new buzz thing, the new interesting things over on the internet, whether it's a cat on a skateboard or your friend putting videos out there on Instagram. You will just move on to the new thing that catches your attention. ChatGPT is designed to catch your attention for long periods of time. How? By making up stories. Problem number 1. Yeah, question.
How could we identify which answer from the ChatGPT is correct and reliable?
Thanks. So how can we identify which answers from ChatGPT are reliable? By leaving ChatGPT and checking on the side, which is actually what lawyers do. You verify your information, you verify the source. And I will talk a little bit about that and what's the difference between a legal research tool and legal research methods and searching for things on ChatGPT or other text generating tools. You have to be very skeptical, and you can't even ask ChatGPT, is this real? Because it will tell you, yes, it's real. You cannot, because it will dig in its own lie, and very rarely will say, oh, I'm sorry, wrong. No, I just made that up. Why? Because people rarely do that. Right? People rarely tell you, oh yeah, I just lied to you. When was the last time someone told you, yeah, I just lied? That doesn't happen. People will change the subject, they will change the topic of the conversation, they will dig in, they will add details to their lies and their stories so that you believe it. But they won't tell you, I just lied to you. So ChatGPT won't.
So we can't seek legal advice from ChatGPT.
Well, look at what this guy did. So Avianca is an airline that was sued in the United States, and Mr. Mata, the guy who sued the airline, so the case is called Mata versus Avianca Airlines. Mr. Mata was represented by a lawyer, and that lawyer used ChatGPT to write the brief. Now, the brief is effectively your submission to the court, the skeleton of your, what we call in Hong Kong the skeleton. So it's a summary of your arguments that you send to the court, and you say, I am attacking this person. I am suing this person, in this case an airline, and I'm suing this person because my flight was delayed and they refused to refund me. Right? And I missed a job interview because of them, so now they owe me $100,000 because I didn't get the job. Okay? Now, I don't know how much you know about legal work, but if you were making such a case, you would need examples of people who sued the airline previously and their flight was delayed and they missed a job interview or they missed a good opportunity and they won and they got money in exchange. That's how you convince the court that this airline also needs to pay you money because there is a precedent for that. There are cases for that. In this brief, there were 6 cases that were completely made up. Completely made up. The cases did not exist. And how did ChatGPT do that? Well, you said to ChatGPT, give me the name of cases where people sued an airline for delay and got compensation. And it did just that. It did exactly what you asked it. It just made up, that is not going to tell you, but it just made up the name of 6 cases of people suing airline. So you have the name of an airline plus the name of a person, and it puts it together, and it gives it a case number, and it tells you this is in the Eastern District Court of Pennsylvania, and that's it. And now you put that in your brief, and you lose your license as a lawyer. Because you're supposed to check what you're submitting, of course. He actually provided the logs, so ChatGPT will have the logs of the conversation. So the lawyer actually, for his defense, now he's asked by the judge to show why he shouldn't be sanctioned for that. And Varghese versus China Southern Airlines is completely made up. That case doesn't exist. But he even asked ChatGPT, wait a minute, is this real? Is this case real? Does it exist? And ChatGPT was, of course. Who do you think you're talking to? Of course it's real. How amazing. The main line of defense of this lawyer, the case is a little bit complicated because the case moved from one jurisdiction to the other. The lawyer submitted a brief in the first jurisdiction, not in the second one. So there are some procedural considerations behind, and we do not know what's going to happen to this guy, but he's certainly going to get sanctioned. Maybe not losing his license forever, but he's probably going to spend a few months without a job. What he says is that he had not understood that ChatGPT was not a research tool, and that it was a text-generating tool. And that's what I really want you to understand out of today. It's not a research tool. Do not use ChatGPT as a research tool. Google is an okay research tool. It's not the best out there, and certainly for lawyers, you can have a quick look on Google to just have a general idea what it's about. But your legal research tool are going to be designed for lawyers, Westlaw, LexisNexis, etc. ChatGPT is not one of these at all, not even remotely. If ChatGPT was working at a law firm, he would have been fired a long time ago. Again, why does it do that? Because it's not designed to tell you, I don't know. It's not designed for you to close the window and think, oh, that's useless. That's just a hyped up search engine. I just can't use that. It's designed for you to continue to engage, to talk about it with your friend, and that makes it hallucinate over telling you the truth. A second problem we have with ChatGPT is that we don't really know where the information is coming from. And I say we don't really know that when we're lazy and we don't look for that information, we don't really know. Actually, you can ask ChatGPT, where did you find that? Can you give me the link to the source for that? And then go and check by yourself. But naturally, it's not going to do that, because naturally it wants you to stay on ChatGPT. It doesn't want you to go to Wikipedia, because then maybe you're just going to use Wikipedia. Right? So it doesn't want you to do that. It wants you to stay on the software. And you have to ask for the sources, and then the sources might be completely fake, so you absolutely have to check them. Right? And then even if the sources are real, then the origin of the source itself might be bonkers, like Reddit. Anyone can go on Reddit and write whatever they want. So you also would have to check that anyways in the first place. But there are some ethical concerns with some of the sources that are used. There's a lot of right-wing sources, there's a lot of kind of extremist websites, because they're very popular, they get automatically roped into the data set at the beginning. And these are ethical concerns that come up with ChatGPT. It's not as solid as going to a textbook, a manual, a book, a library, reading the case by yourself, because that is real. That has been printed, verified by human professionals. And this is where human input remains absolutely essential in things like ChatGPT. The third problem we have with ChatGPT, and I mean at law firms, is that a lot of the lawyers that I spoke to about ChatGPT were actually concerned about losing their job. They were concerned about the potential effect on the long term on their career, and because of that, they would rather not learn how to use it. It's the fear of being replaced or displaced by ChatGPT that makes ChatGPT dangerous, because then they don't learn how to use it properly. They don't even learn what it is. They don't learn how to use it. They don't learn the ethic rules against it. and about it. It might be possible in some cases to use ChatGPT, but it's certainly not going to happen if you don't even understand that it can hallucinate, and the sources it gives you might be wrong, and it uses mostly things like Wikipedia, etc. If you don't know that, if you think it's a brain giving information and it's a super smart person out there at the back, then clearly you're in trouble, and this is when it's going to have a very negative impact on your career. And so rather than having lawyers on the one hand and then AI machines on the other hand competing for the same job, what we're going to have is we're going to have very smart lawyers who have learned to use AI. They will take the job of lawyers who haven't. And so the third issue here is that by being afraid of losing their job and by being afraid of AI in general, lawyers are becoming vulnerable to it, because when they use it wrong, or they don't use it at all. I'll finish today by talking a little bit about my research. I'm doing a master's in education, and my research is on technology in law schools and law firms. And so what I did for my project is that I went to interview lawyers and people who work in recruitment, HR people at law firms, and I went to speak to law students who were just about to graduate or had graduated in the last 12 months. And I asked them a bunch of questions about education. I asked them a bunch of questions about their expectations with technology, like what kind of skills did you expect to learn in law school? Did you expect us to teach you about Word and Excel? Did you expect to learn about AI? What would you have wanted to learn in the last 2-3 years that perhaps you didn't learn? And then I went to ask the lawyers in the law firms, the HR people, when you speak to a law candidate, do you ask them about their technology skills, or do you just assume that they have technology skills? Or do you not care? Are you not concerned about technology at all? And so the results were quite interesting. The students mostly told me, absolutely no surprise, they wanted to learn Office, they expected to learn more Office. They wanted to learn Excel, which we don't, and actually we use Excel quite a lot at law firms and as in-house lawyers. And it's quite embarrassing to arrive at a law firm and to just not be very Excel competent. And so little trick out there, learn Excel when you can. It's always very useful. ChatGPT was number 2 in the list of AI skills that students would want to learn in law school. Right after Office, the number of students who told me AI, ChatGPT, text generating tools, this is what I need to know for my job, because this is what the press is telling me out there, this is what everyone is talking about out there in terms of technology skills. And of course, we didn't learn much of that in law school. Blockchain came number 3, it's quite interesting. I'm not going to go deep into blockchain today, but there were a lot of concerns around not even understanding what blockchain is about and how it works, and whether it had an impact on either the client or the legal profession. Legal research database, LexisNexis, Westlaw, it's actually quite low on the list, but probably should be a bit higher. A few students were concerned about that. Then when I asked lawyers and HR people, do you ask questions about technology skills in interviews? 50-50, yes and no. 50% of partners, recruitment partners, 50% of HR people told me yes. And the other half said no, but actually what came out quite interestingly in the second half, quite a lot of HR people told me I don't, but I probably should. It makes me realize that perhaps I should ask some questions about AI, about Excel, how comfortable are you? Do you use Tableau, for instance? Have you ever seen Tableau? Do you know how it works? Etc. As part of that research, I also went and found some old articles about technology concerns for lawyers. And I found stuff from the 1960s and 70s which showed that fax are going to be a nightmare for lawyers, and of course a big ethical concern because it's so instant and the information is out there and who knows who could intercept it. And then I found articles about Skype from the late 1990s, early 2000s, which is Skype was a very serious ethical concern for lawyers. And of course we all laugh after 3 years on Zoom, mostly working from home, that it has completely entered the ecosystem of lawyers and law firms, legal education, legal work. But 20 years ago, we were asking, is that really a good idea to have video calls? You don't know who else is in the room, you don't know if the other person is recording, you don't know who could intercept the conversation and listen to it, and they were saying it's ethical concerns. And I found an incredibly high number of cases about cloud computing. Because 10 to 15 years ago, lawyers started uploading their files on the cloud without realizing that they were completely losing control over that file, or including losing the passwords and not being able to access them anymore. Where are they stored exactly? So when they were audited by the New York Bar Association, the bar would ask them, oh, do you know where the server is located for this file? And say, no, I have no idea. Is it in the States? I don't know. Is it in the United States? No idea. The level of encryption, etc., etc. And the bar associations around the US, my research was quite US focused for that part. And the bar association prosecuted over 500 lawyers for breaches of privacy and breaches of confidentiality that were related to the use of cloud computing. And that kind of case kind of died down over time because lawyers started to get better. The technology people working at law firms, the CTOs, etc., kind of picked up and started waking up to the dangers of cloud computing, started encrypting the folders. The suppliers became a little bit better at encrypting by default, giving you a password by default. But 15 years ago, you would put a document on Google Drive with the equivalent of Google Drive, and anyone could access it. Anyone with a URL address could access your file, including the deposition from your client in a highly sensitive case, etc. So the technology has improved, and of course, the human error has reduced over time. The last thing that I found in my survey that was quite interesting is when I asked the partners, what skills do you want your students to have? The majority said Office. That's the big long bar here in the chart. The majority said Office. They should really know Office in and out. They should be very comfortable with that. Legal research databases, clearly they need to know LexisNexis, Westlaw, but it's not that high on the list. You can see it's only 25% of lawyers who mentioned it. And the reason is that transaction people don't use it, so it's only litigation lawyers, people who work on arbitration, people who work on lawsuits, versus lawyers who do mergers and acquisitions, IPOs, intellectual property, never really use these databases anymore, anyways, and so that's not such a high concern here. But there were over 10% of lawyers who said, I want them to know the dangers of AI. Not AI. I don't care if they can or cannot use ChatGPT. What I need them to know is the ethical considerations behind it. I need them to know that there are rules out there by the Bar Association, by the Law Society, about what you can and cannot do when using software. When you type something into ChatGPT, do you know if that information still belongs to you, or did you just give a license to OpenAI Limited to actually now own that question that you asked, that piece of information, and reuse it if they wanted to? What if you just put the name of a client in there? Is this allowed? No, it's not. Not more than, say, Googling the name of your client to ask, did he commit murder? You absolutely cannot do something like that because that information immediately leaves the network of your law firm where the computers are secured and safe, and the information is on a closed loop, and suddenly you put that on a server out there. And that information becomes part of the data sets that people will use for their own queries, as we have just seen at the beginning of the presentation. These partners wanted to know, they wanted students, candidates, future lawyers to know the ethical problems behind it. Not a single one of them said, I want them to know ChatGPT, I want them to know how to use ChatGPT. I think because a lot of them realize it's not a research tool. It generates new texts, that's all it does. But they all wanted to make sure, not all, sorry, the minority of those who mentioned AI all wanted the candidates to know there are serious ethical concerns behind it. A brief conclusion is that, of course, it's going to have an impact. It already has an impact. AI already has an impact. When I was a paralegal at a big law firm here 10 years ago, Mayer Brown in Hong Kong had just acquired an AI startup. Why? To do land searches. A land search is when you go to the registry, the government, whomever is in charge of knowing who owns the land in that jurisdiction, and you ask, who owns that piece of land? Or what does this person own? It's manual work, It's quite time consuming. It's profitable. It's good work for the lawyers. But it's very time consuming, and clients generally are not happy to pay for that. And they had acquired a startup that created a software that can go on the registry and search automatically and give you results much faster than if you manually search for your land information. Of course, there is an impact. It's already there and we're already feeling it. We shouldn't be too afraid of being displaced. It's mostly going to be AI lawyers versus non-AI lawyers, not really AI versus lawyers. And if your job can be done by a computer, do you really want to do that anyway? Would you really feel like you're adding a lot of value if you're doing something that a computer can do in 2 seconds? Probably not. Probably you can find something better to do. That's fine. And because of that, we must learn to use AI very, very quickly. And we must learn the limits of it. The number one thing that we must learn about AI is the limits of it. How very, very limited it is. And it's surrounded by a lot of hype and a lot of little tricks to make you think you are having a conversation with a thinking person when you're not. You're talking to a marketing product. That's the number one thing you should know. That and the ethical rules that regulates the use, the very limited possible use of that product. And that's it. I'll keep a few minutes for questions if you have any questions. And if you don't, let me ask you, have you used any AI software? Have you used any app? Have you tried?
Yeah, I tried ChatGPT.
You tried ChatGPT. How was it?
Well, I just said, at the first place, like 10 or 15 minutes is pretty good. And after that, I don't know where else from, So.
Yeah, it becomes quite obvious that it starts making up stories quite quickly.
Yeah. And then, recently, people talk about this is a very hot topic. And, after, a couple of months, then I see that some of universities and companies, they stop using that, Like at the company I work for, we have the communication notes to everyone that you're not allowed to use ChatGPT for work. Yeah. So that's
Okay. So, sorry, just in case we have people online who didn't hear. So, of course, the concern here is that the program is very limited, and then companies are reacting generally by banning it. Universities around the world have said, oh, you cannot use ChatGPT, or here are the rules to use ChatGPT. And for instance, for us, for educators, ChatGPT came at the end of a long period of studying from home, Zoom lectures, at-home exams. So of course, you can see the danger of ChatGPT coming into that. And when we're not here to monitor exams anymore, of course, there's a lot of anxiety that comes around cheating, around plagiarism, when the program is basically designed to plagiarize in the first place. And when it can't plagiarize, it will just make up stories, which is really about the opposite of what you would want a paper to be.
Yeah, and also, I want to add on here is, I'm from the semiconductor industry, and our company, I think they have another concern on the information confidentiality.
Confidentiality around it.
Yes, because company may concern that if the employee puts some confidential information into GPT, and then that data can be used by someone else.
Completely. Completely. Any information you put on ChatGPT, you give a license to ChatGPT. It's in the terms and conditions. You give a license to ChatGPT to reuse that information later on, and so that may breach your employment agreements. That may breach your the rules of your profession if you're a regulated profession. Absolutely, absolutely. Do we have any more questions? I don't know if we can take questions from online or we don't have any. Okay. Excellent. Then we'll stop here. You have yours. Yes.
Thank you to everyone who is here and who also are online. Hong Kong Youth Space is, we are of course on the bleeding edge of tech and law. We have a new program, which is the Postgraduate Diploma in FinTech and Legal Regulations. It's a postgraduate level program starting in September. The first module talks precisely about the impact of law and FinTech. And this program also talks about machine learning, robo advisory, and also other important topics. We also have a new online course coming up, which talks about ChatGPT and law as well. So that's coming up. So keep a lookout on our course web pages and also on IG and Facebook as well. Thank you again to Knut for coming, giving us this very informative talk. Thank you.
Thanks for the invitation.